This is Food Chemistry Unit 1, Industrial Revolution. There was a lot of trial and error regarding how foods were preserved. This is how people learned how to preserve foods. In the 1700s, people started to understand why methods worked. Chemicals were understood. The microscope was improved, and bacteria was understood for their effect on food and human health. The canning process was invented in France, and it expanded commercially. And if you are curious, I will post this video that looks at the history of the canning process, but it's pretty quick. Now, the first U.S. canning plant was opened in New York in 1812. So at this time, scientific knowledge advanced as well as the economy. So you now have power-driven machines. You can harness steam, and coal power was developed. One machine could now do the work of several people. So in the 1830s, you had these machines that really improved farming. You had the thresher, which is right here. It separates grain from the plant. You have the reaper, which cuts down the crop. And you have the steel plow, which breaks up tough soil. And these all increased food production because they made it easier for the farmer to actually break down the crops, right, and get it out to the population. And yours truly actually had a chance to, I know you're super excited to see this, to drive a tractor. This is what a modern day tractor looks like. The farmer was actually in there. He wouldn't let us drive this by ourselves. I took a course in the summer and was allowed to drive one. So it is actually all driven by like a computer on the inside. You basically just have to turn it. So it's a pretty neat experience. So yes, I got to tour some farms. Aren't they adorable? You're welcome. All right, moving on. All right, so we also have specialized factory equipment, which sped up food processing procedures, and it led to the start of many processing companies. So I don't know if any of these look familiar, but they are still around today, and maybe you eat some of these products. 1867, Armour Foods opened. Here's some products. 1869, you have Pillsbury and Campbell's Foods that are opened. So maybe you eat some of these. And I have a couple cute commercials for Pillsbury and Campbell's that are kind of famous, so you can check them out. I'll post them. 1856, we have baking powder being mass-produced. And this helps dough rise when you add it to things that you're baking, like breads or cakes. 1868, we have commercial yeast made available, which again causes the dough to rise. 1890s, you have self-rising flour. All right, so now we're at World War I and II, where you have convenience foods that were established for the military. In the 1930s, which would be after World War I but before World War II, you have pancake mixes, biscuit and cake mixes that were made available for consumers. But at the time, people felt that these products were inferior to homemade food. And then you have World War II, where women entered the workforce to replace the men who went to war. So women had less time to prepare food. The demand for convenience food increased. Salt and butter were also rationed during the war, so now these prepared mixes were actually sought. Okay, so if you have foods being prepared ahead of time and then sold to the population, this is going to cause some government regulation of the food industry. You have mass producing food food is being mass produced, right? And that's creating problems. Government regulation was needed to fix the problems. So let's look at some of this early regulation and why it was required. All right, so before 1820, the main concern with food safety was spoilage. The food would just go bad, right? Now, mass food production and canning created what's called adulteration. And adulteration lowered the quality and safety of a product caused by adding inferior or toxic ingredients. So check out some of these products here. Look at ground pepper, what was added? Gravel, leaves, and twigs. That all looks like ground pepper, right? But you basically add this and reduce the actual pepper, right? Vinegar had diluted sulfuric acid, and if you're curious, sulfuric acid is in car batteries. That's really, really toxic. Coffee had roasted grain, probably stuff that was left over. Scorched beans, right? And peas, burnt beans and peas that nobody wants to eat, right? And baked horse liver, because it all looks like coffee. Milk was watered down or else had chalk, starch, gelatin, or borax, that's a type of soap, added. Sugar had sand, dust, and lime mixed in. So why do this? Why put all of this stuff into the food supply, right? Well, it's greed, right? People wanted to save money. There was declining personal accountability for the food. For the food. You didn't quite know who was touching your food. Food was now processed, so more people have access to it. All right, so in 1862, you have the development of the USDA, that stands for United States Department of Agriculture, which oversees food production and research. And yes, it's still around today. At the time, it had little authority to monitor or enforce food safety of the food supply. Now, in 1883, a man named Harvey Wiley was appointed the head chemist of the USDA, and he campaigned to eliminate misnamed and adulterated foods. A little side note here, he established what was called a poison squad, and you can check this out. There's a little film on it. There's also a book on it called The Poison Squad, which I did read. He basically asked young men to come to dinner, and they'd be paid for this, but in the dinner, some of the men would get, and yes, it was just men, usually like college students who needed some money. Some of the meals were totally fine, and then some of the meals had ingredients added to them that were in the food supply that Harvey was trying to prove were bad. So, for example, one meal, some guys had good food, and then some would just have borax in some of the food, or have like the starch or stuff added that shouldn't have been in there, right? He was trying to prove that there were ingredients added that weren't healthy, and he would track the side effects that the men had. So yeah, a lot of these guys would get sick. They knew it going in. He wasn't hiding it. He just didn't tell them if they were getting the good food or the bad food. So that's how he figured out that there were things in the food supply that weren't good, and he just campaigned to get this stopped. So actually people didn't believe him. They didn't want to believe him. Particularly the people that were controlling the companies didn't want to lose money. So it was a huge fight, and he eventually won. But that's how it all started. And you're welcome to check this out. I encourage it. I think the guy was fantastic for the work he did. Nonetheless, 1906, so look at that time frame, right? Look how long it took. Wiley's work led to the Pure Food and Drug Act. It authorized his department to actually regulate and monitor the food supply. It ultimately became the FDA, or Food and Drug Administration, which is still around today, regulates about 80% of the food supply. So why only 80%? It does not regulate meat or poultry. That is still with the USDA, probably because it's agriculture, which regulates these. Now, the FDA, our current FDA, it sets labeling guidelines, standards for safety, and approves food additives. In 1938, it expanded to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, as well as it should, because cosmetics, touches your skin, right? The Food Code was also developed, which is a reference for knowing how to prevent foodborne illnesses in food service operations, such as restaurants, grocery stores, schools, and hospitals. In 2015, the FSMA was developed. This is the Food Safety Modernization Act, which shifts the focus to preventing foodborne illnesses.